So you've made your first character and you're ready to pit them against the challenges concocted by your DM. But then, as soon as gameplay starts, a bunch of terms get thrown around. Make a strength check, make a stealth check, make a saving throw, make an attack roll. Hi, I'm Ian and welcome to D&D Cram School. And today, we're going to be discussing the main gameplay loop of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Broken down into its simplest parts, the gameplay loop involves an exchange of information between the Dungeon Master and the players. It usually begins with the Dungeon Master describing a scene or environment that the players find themselves in. Then the players will ask clarifying questions and describe what their characters do. The Dungeon Master will then see if there is a reasonable chance of success or failure, and then may call for a d20 roll. After comparing the result of that roll to the DC or difficulty class, the Dungeon Master narrates the outcome. The difficulty class is determined by the Dungeon Master, and as you might guess, the higher number it is, the more difficult the challenge may be. However, the DM may ask you to add certain modifiers to this roll. Let's say the DM describes the environment as a forest, and your player character is approached by a wolf. You may ask your DM if the wolf seems friendly or hostile, or if you can hear any of the other members of its pack. You may choose to attack the wolf or try to befriend it. Let's say you try to befriend it though. The DM may call for an animal handling check, which is one of the skills we came up with during character creation. Now, the DC your role has to meet or beat is also affected by some other factors. For example, if your character offers a treat, the DM may lower the DC, rather than when your character may have just used their tone of voice. For example, the check may normally be 15, but with a treat, it drops to 10. One of the most impactful ways for your role to be affected is by advantage or disadvantage. If the DM determines that your chances of success are especially favorable or unfavorable, they may ask you to roll 2 dice. With advantage, you roll 2 dice and get the higher of the numbers. With disadvantage, you get to roll 2 dice and you have to take the lower of the 2 numbers. There are a lot of ways to get advantage or disadvantage in this game, such as through spells or features, and clever players may try to figure these ways out in order to maximize their chances of success. As a player, remember that most of the time, you'll be rolling a d20 to determine the success of these outcomes. However, you'll also want a set of other dice, such as d6s and d8s, but these will mostly be used in terms of damage or other special features that may call for them. If you're a DM watching this, make sure that you're only calling for die rolls when there's a meaningful consequence to the success or failure. There have been plenty of times that I've called for a check where I completely expected my players to succeed and carry on with a meaningful impact on the story, and they ended up failing. There have also been times when I've never expected my players to succeed and they ended up doing it anyway, which had weird narrative consequences. Remember that it's perfectly acceptable to allow a player to succeed or fail automatically on small things. A great example has to do with somebody I was playing with a few years ago. They were playing a high dex roll character.
Chocolate! What?
And a NPC was standing at the top of a cliff above them, intending to drop a scroll into their grasp. The DM could have called for a check to see if they would catch it, but the consequence wouldn't really have been that meaningful. Yeah, we could have had a laugh at the table at the character failing to catch the scroll and dropping it and fumbling in their hands, but it wouldn't have had a good impact on the story. And the character would have probably caught the scroll anyway, and it wouldn't have changed the outcome of them receiving the item. And the DM had them describe how they caught it, so there was a small cinematic moment before gameplay returned to normal. However, if there was an intense combat scenario, and we were trying to protect the scroll from some evil NPCs or bandits, then there might be a more meaningful impact to failing to catch the scroll. For example, the bandits could get it, so an acrobatics check might be called for. But what are these terms that we're throwing around anyway? Like check, attack, saving throw? In 5th edition system, there are 3 categories for which you'll see the d20 rolls in the rules. The first is an ability check, which is used to overcome a challenge. An ability check might only use a character's ability score that we came up with during character creation. For example, if your strength is a +3, you'll roll a d20 roll on a strength check and add 3. This might be useful for moving a boulder or knocking down a door. However, I find more often than not, an ability check is usually accompanied by a specific skill proficiency. For example, an athletics check would add our proficiency bonus to that base modifier. A first level barbarian may have a +3 in strength, but in athletics, they may be proficient and have a +5 instead. There are certain rules or spells that often call for a check that is based solely in an ability score, such as those that call for an intelligence or charisma check. However, more often than not, a DM may come up with a challenge that warrants a specific skill check. And so, if you've bubbled in that skill as being proficient, then you get to add your additional modifier. Saving throws are rolls that you use to avoid a harmful effect. These come up a lot in spells where you may be asked to make a dexterity or a constitution saving throw. That's why saving throw proficiencies are in a different section of your character sheet, and why certain classes have specific defenses that they specialize in. Lastly, an attack roll is to see if we hit a target with a weapon or a spell. Note that spells will say if the target has to make a saving throw or if it's simply an attack roll against their armor class to hit. This armor class is a special DC determined by the DM, but they might not tell you what it is. To wrap up this video, D&D's gameplay is more or less structured based on the character's situation that they find themselves in. While there is more or less some overlap between these different types, the player's handbook and the basic rules do categorize these as the 3 pillars of play. These pillars are exploration, social interaction, and combat. Since combat tends to have the most rules, we'll be diving into that on our next episode called Action Economy. Until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell for more easy tips for starting your D&D adventures. Have an awesome day, everyone. We'll catch you guys next time.